Hello, I'm Sebastian. Welcome to 9 Trees podcast. Today I will summarize and review the book. Viking Economics by George Lakey is a politically grounded, story-driven exploration of how Scandinavian countries built societies that combine high living standards, competitive businesses, and strong social protections. Rather than treating the Nordic model as a cultural mystery, Lakey frames it as the result of deliberate choices and sustained popular movements that shifted power and rewrote the rules of the economy. The book surveys Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland through a practical lens: what policies were adopted, how they were won, and why they endure. Along the way, it challenges assumptions that equality weakens growth or that generous welfare states inevitably stifle innovation. Lakey also draws connections to debates in the United States and other market economies, arguing that the Scandinavian experience offers transferable lessons for expanding democracy at work, strengthening unions, and designing universal public services. The result is a readable guide to what makes these systems function and how reformers elsewhere might adapt key elements. I will give you key takeaways from this book. Firstly, the Nordic model as a set of choices, not a cultural accident. A central theme is that Scandinavian outcomes did not emerge because people are uniquely virtuous or homogeneous, but because institutions were built over time to balance markets with social goals. The book highlights how universal programs such as healthcare, education, family supports, and income security reduce fear of risk and create broad buy-in, since benefits are not restricted to a narrow group. That universality also makes programs harder to dismantle because most citizens have a stake in their quality. Lakey contrasts this with means-tested approaches that can fragment political support and create stigma. Another key point is the role of social trust as an outcome of fairness, not merely a precondition. When systems are perceived as predictable and equitable, compliance and cooperation rise. The Nordic model is presented as a toolbox: progressive taxation, strong public services, and coordinated labor markets working together. Readers are encouraged to look past stereotypes and instead examine incentives, power relations, and policy design. This framing makes the Nordic experience more relevant to other countries because it shifts the conversation from copying culture to learning how institutional choices can reshape everyday economic life. Secondly, labor power, unions, and coordinated bargaining. The book emphasizes organized labor as a core engine of Scandinavian prosperity and equality. High union density and sector-wide bargaining are portrayed as mechanisms that set fair wage floors, limit low-wage competition, and encourage firms to compete through productivity and innovation rather than labor cost-cutting. Coordinated bargaining also tends to compress wage differences, which can reduce social tension and support broad consumer demand. Lakey discusses how unions in these countries often operate as professional, membership-based institutions that provide training, legal support, and a channel for collective voice. The relationship between labor and employers is shown as structured conflict within predictable rules, often supported by legal frameworks that protect organizing and collective negotiation. The book also links labor strength to political influence. Unions help mobilize voters, develop policy proposals, and sustain reform coalitions over decades. Another takeaway is that worker power extends beyond wages into workplace democracy, safety standards, and predictable scheduling, which shapes quality of life and family stability. By presenting unions as economic institutions rather than special interests, the book invites readers to consider how collective bargaining can coexist with dynamic private enterprise and how rebuilding worker voice could address inequality in other contexts. Thirdly, universal welfare and public services that enable freedom. Lakey frames Scandinavian welfare states not as charity, but as infrastructure for a freer life. Universal healthcare, affordable childcare, paid parental leave, tuition-free or low-cost education, and robust unemployment insurance reduce the consequences of bad luck and lower the personal cost of changing jobs, starting a business, or seeking training. This social safety net can increase economic dynamism by making people less afraid to take calculated risks. The book also stresses that well-designed public services support high labor force participation, especially among women, which expands the tax base and strengthens household incomes. Rather than seeing taxes solely as a burden, the narrative treats them as pooled purchasing for services that individuals would otherwise buy more expensively or not at all. Lakey also points to the political durability of universal benefits. When middle and working classes share the same schools, clinics, and supports, there is stronger pressure to keep quality high. The topic includes how these systems are financed through broad-based taxes and contributions, and why transparency and competence in public administration matter for legitimacy. Readers come away with a view of welfare as a platform for opportunity, not a trade-off against growth. Fourthly, how social movements reshaped policy and power. A distinctive contribution of the book is its focus on the organizing and nonviolent struggle that helped create Nordic institutions. Lakey connects major reforms to sustained popular movements, including labor mobilization, farmer and cooperative organizing, women's movements, and campaigns that expanded democratic participation. The argument is that policy change followed shifts in power, not simply enlightened leadership. By examining how coalitions were built and maintained, the book highlights practical lessons about strategy, building mass membership organizations, developing shared narratives of fairness, and negotiating durable compromises without surrendering core goals. Another point is that Scandinavian societies faced sharp conflict and inequality at earlier stages, and reforms were won through contestation and experimentation. The book suggests that movements succeeded when they connected immediate demands, such as wages and working conditions, to broader visions of social citizenship. It also addresses how institutions can lock in gains, making future reversals harder. For readers outside Scandinavia, the emphasis on movement building reframes the Nordic model as a process that can be pursued incrementally. The takeaway is not merely what policies exist, but how communities can develop the capacity to fight for them, defend them, and adapt them to new economic pressures. Lastly, adapting Scandinavian lessons to other economies, the book argues for adaptation rather than imitation, recognizing that each country has distinct political structures, racial and regional dynamics, and economic histories. Lakey explores which Nordic elements are most transferable, strengthening collective bargaining, expanding universal programs, investing in education and training, and creating rules that reduce extreme inequality. He also highlights common objections, such as claims that small countries can do things large ones cannot, or that high taxes would automatically slow growth. The Nordic experience is used to complicate those assumptions by showing how productivity, innovation, and competitiveness can coexist with high social spending when institutions are aligned. Another emphasis is sequencing. Reforms become more feasible when constituencies are built around universal benefits and when worker organizations can bargain for fair distribution of gains. The book also suggests that cultural narratives can change through visible results, as people experience improved security and opportunity. For policy-minded readers, the lesson is to treat economics as a design problem, adjust incentives, build countervailing power, and aim for systems that produce dignity and resilience. For activists, the lesson is to pair concrete reforms with long-term movement capacity so that policy wins are not isolated or reversible. In conclusion, this book suits readers who want a realistic, actionable understanding of what people often call the Nordic model, including students of public policy, organizers, union members, and curious citizens comparing economic systems. It is also useful for skeptics who assume that equality and prosperity are mutually exclusive, because it focuses on institutional design and political power rather than idealized national character. The benefit to a reader's life is practical. It widens the sense of what is possible, clarifies how universal public services can expand everyday freedom, and shows how labor rights and social protections shape family stability, health, and career choices. It also helps readers evaluate proposals at home with sharper questions about universality, durability, and who holds leverage in the economy. Compared with many books that either romanticize Scandinavia or reduce it to a list of policies, Viking economics stands out for connecting outcomes to social movements and strategies for change. That movement-centered lens makes it more than a travelogue of institutions and more than an abstract economics argument. If you want a grounded case study of how organized citizens can build a high-trust, high-performance society, this is worth buying and revisiting. If you would like to support George Lakey, you can buy the book through the Amazon link I've provided in the podcast description. After reading the book, please let me know what you think and share your thoughts. See you around.